I'm thinking as we've been going through this, we'll get through everything, this whole part today. I'm hoping we get through it. And then maybe next week will be the last week. So we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I've never taught this before, so I don't know each week how long it's going to take to get through everything. But I'm kind of getting a feel for this. So I think we'll get through everything today. I may ask for some questions partly through. I may not, because I don't know if I'd answer them really well right now. But let's start with prayer, and that'd be a good place to start. Dear Heavenly Father God, I just pray that you're with us tonight, Lord. I know that this is important. It's not as important as diving into your word, Lord, and knowing truth, but you have called us, Lord, to take every thought captive, and we hear this war language that there's these false ideologies that are out there throughout the whole history of the church, Lord, that we're called to identify, that we're called to understand, that we're called to take captive, Lord, and replace our thoughts with truth. And so I pray as we continue to go through this class, Lord, and learn more and more about this false ideology of applied postmodernism or the social justice ideologies, Lord, that you would just help us to think clearer, God. And so I pray that you're with me tonight, Lord. I'm tired. I just pray the Spirit would speak through me and would speak with clarity. And I just pray that there would be understanding. In your Son's name, amen. Man, I thought we voted this time change out. Is that not? You get an extra hour of sleep and it still just throws you off. But I had a ton of coffee, so hopefully that'll wake me up. Again, this is the fourth part today, and we explained the last time. We weren't here last week, but the week before last. I really felt like that week was explaining this ideology pretty clearly. That was my goal going through this course. Today, I really wanted to show why I considered applied postmodernism. Again, I'm using that term, applied postmodernism. There's all different types of names: social justice ideology, critical theory, that overarching understanding or a name for this ideology that's out there. I like applied postmodernism, and you can go back to the lessons before this to see why I like that name. So I'll go back and forth between applied postmodernism and social justice ideologies. But I've been saying throughout this whole course that applied postmodernism is really a religion. It's a religion and a worldview, and most worldviews are how you answer the deep questions of this world, how you view this world. And most worldviews are either completely connected to a religion or are a religion. And so today I wanted to show why I considered applied postmodernism a religion, and I want to compare it to the Christian worldview. And I hope you see how they are antithetical today, that they don't combine, that they say two opposite things. And so how I'd like to do this is that there's 12 questions that I'm going to ask, and worldviews answer the type of questions I'm going to ask, these 12 questions, and I'm going to answer them from a biblical worldview first, and then an applied postmodernism or social justice ideology worldview second, and compare how this ideology and Christianity answers these questions. I get a lot of these questions, I think 9 out of the 12, a lot of the questions and the answers from the book, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. I'm going to read a lot of the answers that's in that book. And then I've added a couple other that I think are super important in understanding this worldview. So that's all I want to do today is kind of walk through these 12 questions. Next week, just to give you kind of a preview, and maybe we'll do this slowly so we can pull it into 2 different weeks and maybe answer some questions that you may have. But next week, there was a statement that was put out by a group of theologians. I think John MacArthur was probably the most famous pastor that was involved in this statement. I don't know exactly when it was put out. Does anyone? It's the Social Justice in the Gospel statement. Was it 2019? I think it was before that. I think it was more like 2016 or 17. It was way before. And they were very early. They saw this coming. And we've adopted this statement as a church. I think it's a really well-written statement, in my opinion. And next week, we're going to kind of go through each of the articles of the statement. And it's really good because it gives a positive and a negative, what we believe and what we deny. And I think that's really helpful. And it's kind of what we're going to do today a little bit. But we're going to go through that statement, and I think it'll be really helpful to walk through that statement. It's actually a statement we've adopted as a church. I've said this before. Any employee of the church that's going to be in some kind of a teaching position, all the elders of the church, all the employees of our school, all the teachers of our school have to sign an agreement with this statement to teach here at the church or the school as a way of protecting these false ideologies entering into our church. And I think it's really important for the school because there's a lot of parents, and I see parents out here that I know would agree to this, that have put their kids in the school to protect them from these false ideologies. And we as an elder board wanted to make sure that they don't sneak into our school. And so this statement, you'll be able to see exactly, what am I doing? Notes? Anyone need notes? Oh, man. Okay, cool. You keep your hands up. Anyone want to help pass out? Oh, thanks, Mike. This is one of the ways the elders was really trying to keep these false ideologies to enter into the church, and more importantly, I really think enter into the school. And so we'll be going over that very clearly starting next week. I would say too, if there's anyone that's a part of the school that wants to get a clearer, I see some people that are a part of the school. They're more than welcome to come. They haven't come to any of this class to see exactly why we have this statement. But we'll talk more about that next week. I'll throw that out to Amy, maybe to send an email out to employees of the school. Today, again, I want to answer these 12 questions from biblical worldview and then from applied postmodernism. So the first question, I'm trying to solve so you guys can get the notes. The first question is very philosophical. A lot of the questions that we'll get going will be more theological or even practical. But I think this first question is really important. And if you took the presuppositional apologetics before this class, you understand why this is an important question. But the first question is this: what is ultimately real? What is ultimately real? A biblical worldview says that God, the God of Genesis 1:1, defines ultimate reality. Right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He's the one that defines what reality is. And we believe, as Christians, truth corresponds with that reality. It's called the correspondence theory of truth, that what is true corresponds with reality that's outside of us. Reality is what God reveals it to be, and the ultimate reality really is God himself. Okay? Again, that's a philosophical understanding of what truth is, but I think it's important because applied postmodernism answers this question differently. It's one of the reasons I like to call it applied postmodernism. What is ultimately real? The answer for applied postmodernism is the human mind defines what is ultimately real. Okay? That's the influence of postmodernism. Okay? This is an idealist belief. Hegel, we talked about, is an idealist. Marx was a materialist, believing that reality was material. Marx himself said that he turned Hegel onto his head. The Frankfurt School, if you went through the history and were able to follow along, were idealists again. They turned Hegel back right side up. I wouldn't worry about all that. A postmodern society falls in line with idealism. Idealism says we can't get to realities that are outside of our own thinking, our own ideas. Therefore, our thoughts that are in our head are what is truly real. Okay? And the consequences of this is relativism. Right? That's why you can take someone that believes, and I use this example over and over again, but it's just such a good example in this. You can take someone that says they're a girl when they're biologically a male, and you can point to truths that are outside their own thinking, and they just ignore it. Because reality is the ideas that are in their head. And that's why they believe, they can believe something that seems so absurd to us with a Christian worldview. American social theorist Jeremy Rifkin writes this, and I think this will help you kind of It's a good analogy of what I mean by this. We no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home, God's home, right? And therefore obligated to make our behavior conform with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. We make the rules now. We establish the perimeter of reality. We create the world, and because we do, we no longer feel beholden to outside forces. We no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible for nothing outside of ourselves, for we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. I think that describes just kind of the thinking of modern man in our society. There's no truth out there that we have to submit to. It's inside, subjective. It's the ideas that are within my head. Now, applied postmodernism has taken that a step further, as we'll talk about in a second here. It's no longer individual ideas, but group ideas and group identity. Right? That is what's ultimately real, what the group identity claims to be real, the different groups. If you attack a person's truth claims, you're attacking that person. Or if you attack a group's truth claims, you're attacking that group. This is why, again, I'm going to quote Scott David Allen, who I'm taking a lot of this from. This is why homosexuality is not seen as a choice or behavior, but an identity, right? A group identity. It's not what I do or how I think, it's who I am. Right? Truth becomes personal. Right? If you oppose someone's homosexuality in this view, you are denying his or her very humanity. That's what it feels like, or that's what they think. Akin to a Nazi dehumanizing a Jew or a slaveholder dehumanizing a slave. There is no forgiveness for such a person. This is the ideology that people have come under in really postmodernism. And this new worldview has given postmodernism feet. That truth is inside of me, therefore if I attack the truth I'm claiming, if I attack your truth, you feel like I'm attacking you. And if I say I'm a certain type of person or a certain gender, and you say no you're not, you're attacking that person, you're dehumanizing. That's what this ideology says. Okay, now that was deeply philosophical. Let's move to some things that I think are a little bit more practical, things we can get our mind wrapped around a little bit better. The second question, okay, who are we? This is an important question. Who are we as humans? A biblical worldview, we're creations and image bearers of a good, holy, and loving God with an inherent dignity and immeasurable worth. It's a biblical worldview. Applied postmodernism, we are creatures whose identity is wholly and socially determined, right? Group identity. We are products of our race, sex, and gender identity. We saw this last time we were together. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is one of the leaders of the social justice movement, she's the one that coined the term intersectionality. She says that we shouldn't say, I'm a person that happens to be black. Right? We should no longer say that. We should say, I am black. That's African Americans should just say, I am black. Their group identity, because there's no shared human experience. There's nothing that connects us outside of our group identity besides the social binary that we talked about 2 weeks ago, the oppressor and oppressed. Remember, that's the one thing that connects all humans together, is this idea of oppressor and oppressed. And what group you belong to determines which one you are. You following along with me so far? The civil rights movement said something completely different. We are connected by our own essence. We're connected by our essence and our common humanity. That was the civil rights movement. That was the cry of the civil rights movement. We're all humans. Right? Martin Luther King Jr. said this, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the conduct of their character. The social justice movement has a completely different ideology and worldview than the civil rights movement. The only identity that matters is found in the color of our skin or gender or sexuality. And we are only connected again by this power struggle, oppressed and oppressor. That's the relationship that we have with each other. The one meta-narrative that connects us together is this power struggle. That's it. Okay? And again, as I said 2 weeks ago, think of the consequences of that. It's one of the reasons I've taken such a strong stand on this once I got my mind somewhat wrapped around it, because I see where it's leading. It only leads to hatred, division, and really tribalism. Scott Allen writes, ideological social justice, by contrast, views human beings as creatures whose identity is wholly determined by group affirmations, particularly those based on race, sex, and so-called group identity, LGBTQ+. There is no shared human nature. Even more radically, there is no such thing as the individual. It's important in understanding this worldview. There's no universals besides the oppressor and oppressed, the social binary, what I keep calling. There's nothing that connects us besides that. Okay, there's no universals, and there's no individuals. Right? You're a part of the group that you belong to. And in denying the existence of the individual and claiming that our identity is wholly defined by the groups we belong to, ideological social justice, and that's another word for applied postmodernism, repudiates the essential idea that grounds Western civilization. If this dehumanizing and dangerous idea carries the day, the cultural consequences will be far more devastating than we can imagine. The Judeo-Christian worldview that shaped Western civilization is, at root, based on the idea that we have a shared, common human nature, and at the same time, human individuality profoundly matters. Let me just stop there, because I just think it's amazing, the Christian worldview, how just perfect it is. Right? We have a shared humanity, that we have a commonality and individual personalities. What does that sound like? Right, the God we worship, who is one in three persons. Right? He's unity and he's diversity at the same time. And we learned in the presuppositional apologetics class, we live in a universe. Unity and diversity. It's a reflection of who God is. Right? Universe, diversity, universe. But the same with humanity. We're one church with many parts. Right? In my family, we're one family with individual persons. And in my marriage, we are one flesh, right? Two individual people. Right? This is a reflection of who God is. It fits so well in the biblical worldview, but not in this applied postmodernism, because every single person is a special, unique creation of God, being in his holy image. And so he says this: unless we wake up to its danger, social justice will destroy us, and it will do it in the name of justice. I just believe we're going to see more and more tribalism and disunity if this ideology gets a foothold in our country, and especially within the churches. Any questions so far? Hopefully I'm making sense. Mind. Need that coffee to kick in. All right. It's like getting close to bedtime, and it's only 6:20. So, yeah. All right. Are we good? Now, this is so important. Right? This is the third question I'm asking. Are we good? And I really think that this is probably the most important question that separates these two worldviews. I really think Marxism as a whole, this is what separates Marxism even from capitalism, not just the biblical worldview, but it's this idea, are we good? Okay, so important. Biblical worldview, no, we're not. We are born depraved. And I just want to read these because I think it's important that we understand this. Romans 3:10, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks. for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Psalms 51:5, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Right, from conception on. Ephesians 2:1, and you were dead, right, dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of power of the air, the spirit that's now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature, this is our nature, children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. Titus 3:3, for we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our days in malice and envy, hated by others and hating one another. We were born depraved. That's what the biblical worldview is. We were born with a sin nature, in sin. Applied postmodernism answers this completely different. We were either born inherently, and I would say most people would say good in our culture. Good, or at least innocent, or a blank slate. Neither good or bad. I would say most people in our culture nowadays would say good. We were born good. Therefore, evil is programmed by the culture, not the individual. Meaning, all oppression is always the system's fault, not the individual. And that goes both for the oppressor and oppressed. We have no, if you're a white male and you're an oppressor, you're just born that way, and it's part of the system that's made you that way, and you need to wake up to it. You need to be woke. Right? That's where this idea comes from. We're all victims of an evil system. Again, let me just give you an example. If the majority of and you've heard things like this, so this is just a practical example. If the majority of homicides are done by African Americans in Chicago, right, it's not the murderer's fault. It's the fault of the evil system they grew up in. There's no personal responsibility because we were born good and something corrupted us. It wasn't us. It wasn't our heart. You with me on that? Does it make sense? That's why if there is an inequality of outcome between identity groups, it's always because of the systems, because we were born either a blank slate, but like I said, most people would say we were born good and something happened to us that caused us to go bad, right? Something outside of us, not inside of us. The Bible directly looks at your own heart, right? And don't get me wrong, we're born depraved, and there's outside influences that could bring that depravity out in different levels within society. And so I grew up in a loving home with two parents, and I'm very thankful for that. And you could grow up in a whole different environment, right? And be a criminal of some sort. In fact, there's a statistic I saw the other day that 80% of people in prison right now grew up in a single-parent home. But it doesn't relieve personal responsibility in the biblical worldview. It doesn't. We're still responsible for our actions, no matter what environment we grew up in. We can have all types of empathy for people that grew up in different environments than we did, and we should as Christians, right? But that does not relieve personal responsibility. Again, okay. Any questions on that one? I think that's an important one, by the way. We really want to understand these two different worldviews. If you really want to understand the difference between communism and even capitalism, it's that one question: are we born a blank slate? Are we born good, or are we born depraved? You answer those two questions, you understand the direction it's going from there. Okay. Fourth question. And again, the reason I'm going through these questions, let me stop and say this, is because I want you to see that this is a religion. It's not just a worldview, it's a religion. It's answering religious questions. How are we born? Are we good? How can we be saved? We're going to answer some of these questions as we keep going. But it's answering these questions that religions answer, or worldviews should answer. So the fourth question, what is our fundamental problem as human beings? Okay, what is our fundamental problem as human beings? Biblical worldview, rebellion. Fundamental problem, rebellion. All have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. Our rebellion against God has resulted in broken relationships between God and man, between man, and between man and creation. Okay. What is our fundamental problem as human beings? Applied postmodernism, oppression. Fundamental problem, oppression. White, heteronormative, able-bodied males have established and maintained hegemonic power structures that oppress and subjugate women, people of color, and sexual minorities, LGBTQ+, and others. Fundamental problem in society. Right? It's not individual racism or hatred. That's where I think a lot of Christians are kind of missing it. We keep thinking that people are saying that we're individually racist. They're not. They're saying the whole system is racist. We being a part of a system. They're not necessarily saying we as individuals are racist, but we're racist by being part of a racist system. Okay? It's the hegemonic power structures. Again, that word hegemony, I think, is an important word that we put in our vocabulary to understand this ideology. It should be at the bottom, right? A footnote? Okay. Hegemony was a notion developed by Italian communist Antonio Gramsci of a dominant group imposing its own socially constructed values and knowledge onto marginalized groups in order to maintain power over them. Okay, that's hegemony, hegemonic power, or hegemonic systems, or power structures. That's what that is saying. Okay. Again, it's not individual racism. It's why identity groups, not races, or even minorities. Okay. It's because, just think about this, sexual minorities aren't races. Like homosexuals, they're not a race. It's a group identity, right, that are oppressed. And females aren't minorities. They're majorities. But neither group identity, according to this worldview, has hegemonic power. Right? They don't have power in our society because both are oppressed by evil systems that elevate males and heteronormative sexual orientation. You with me on that? Does it make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense, but within the system, does it make sense? Any questions so far? Either I'm making a lot of sense or I'm making absolutely no sense. So we'll just keep going. Struggle through this. Fifth question. Where is the fundamental problem found? And this is important too. This question, again, very religious, I believe. Where is this fundamental problem found? Because a religion is going to ask that question. What went wrong? Where's the problem? And where's the problem found? Okay, biblical worldview. The problem is found inside me. A rebellious heart. Therefore, I am a sinner needing salvation. Okay. Applied postmodernism. The problem is found outside of me. Oppressive structures. Therefore, I am a victim. Major difference. And this is probably the one that's most influential within the church. I don't know how many people come to me and come with this idea that they're victims, and we have to kind of turn it around and go, okay, well, where are you not a victim? Where is the sin within you that you need to repent from? In this struggle, one group persistently has supremacy, white, heteronormative males. They accomplish this feat over centuries by establishing a complex web of social structures, system, and institutions, laws, and norms that advantage them at the expense of everyone else, particularly people of color, women, and sexual minorities, LGBTQ+. Socially constructed systems within our society that privilege, right, white, male, heteronormative, cisgender, able-bodied, skinny. You just keep going, right? Follow along. I'm trying to kind of hit these truths over and over and over again until we get our minds kind of wrapped around it too. Okay, sixth question. What is the solution to our problem? Right? Okay, so remember, the problem is inside of me, biblical worldview. Applied postmodernism, the problem is outside of me, I'm a victim. Okay, so what is the solution? Biblical worldview, the gospel. On the cross, God incarnate bore the punishment we deserve for sinful rebellion in order to show us a mercy we could never deserve. His death on the cross and his resurrection opened the way for the reconciliation of all of our broken relationships. Right? Again, if the problem is in me, then the gospel is the solution. Right? Grace and mercy is our only hope, a heart change, right? Heart of stone to a heart of flesh, an uncircumcised heart to a circumcised heart. Death to new life. If evil systems are the problem, in other words, the problem is outside of me, then there is only one solution. Destroy the systems. Revolution. Get rid of the systems that are oppressing. I'm telling you, this is why there was riots on the streets. Applied postmodernism, right? The solution to the problem is revolution. Oppressed victims and their allies must unite to unmask, deconstruct, and overthrow these oppressive power structures, systems, and institutions. Again, this is why riots on the streets. This is why defund the police. These don't come from emotions alone. These come from an ideology that are pushing these things. Okay? Karl Marx, of course, was a committed revolutionary. His great aim was to tear down the oppressive capitalistic system and build his communist utopia. Social justice ideology takes it a step further, make that several steps. It seeks the overthrow of systemic white supremacy, the patriarchy, and Judeo-Christian morality. This revolutionary zeal drives one side of the ongoing culture war. While many social justice advocates say they want to build a better world, they seem far more animated about tearing the existing one down. That's exactly right? That's what we see. There's this idea that we just need to tear down the systems. And you ask, well, what are you going to replace it with? We'll get to that question in a second here. But you don't hear much about that. If you defund the police, then what? You don't hear it. Right? It's about tearing down the evil systems. But there's a reason why you don't hear it. And we'll hear what we're going to replace it with. And it comes back to that idea, is man evil or good? Inherently evil or inherently good? And we'll talk about it in a second. Okay. How can we be saved? Number seventh question. How can we be saved? Biblical worldview. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Romans 10, 9 and 13. Okay. How can you be saved? Applied postmodernisms. Victims are morally innocent and do not require salvations. Oppressors can never be fully pardoned. I mean, just think about that. There is no forgiveness in this. You don't hear that talked about. Can never be pardoned. But partial salvation is available if they confess their complicity in oppression and support the revolution. Again, victims are morally innocent and do not require salvation. Oppressors need to be woke to their oppression. They need to be woken up to their oppression, confess their complicity in oppression, and support the revolution through activism. And really keep their mouth shut and follow without questioning. Right? And there's a reason for that too. Eighth question. What is our primary moral duty? What is our primary moral duty? Biblical worldview. To love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, which involves living in obedience to all that Christ commanded and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Right? 2 greatest commandments. What is our moral duty, applied postmodernism? To stand in solidarity with, protect, and defend the oppressed. That means women, people of color, sexual minorities, LGBTQ+, and etc. Okay? To stand in solidarity without question. Again, if you're an oppressor, you can't speak into any situation because you don't have the authority to speak into that, which we'll talk about in a second here. But that standing in solidarity is really always changing. When you think about it, social justice moral norms are always in flex. What is okay today is definitely not going to be okay tomorrow. It kind of hit me when, you guys remember when Amy Coney Barrett was criticized for using the term sexual preference? If you were watching when they were questioning her, sexual preference in the confirmation hearing. That's an outdated statement, sexual preference. And they were saying she should have said sexual orientation. Well, that's an outdated statement now. It's now sexual identity. It's a moving target. The rules of the game are moving so fast that you can't stay up. People that are on this side of morality are very quickly on the other side because it's not a stable morality. It's not something that is concrete. Right? Things that were formerly understood to be good, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, reserving sex until marriage as the exclusive lifelong union between a man and a woman, even the male-female binary itself, are increasingly understood as bad. They're bigoted, hateful, discriminatory tools of oppression. And that just keeps changing. I mean, that sounds so outdated, that statement right there. But feminists now are on the wrong side. Right? There's all types of feminists that are getting considered bigoted because they're not letting transgenders be part of the feminism. You have a male MMA fighter beating up a bunch of females, and you have feminists calling that out, and they're oppressors. Right? It's a moving target. So, if say homosexuality is wrong, you're trying to maintain your heterosexual privilege, you're homophobic. You say abortion is wrong, you're just a man trying to control a woman's body, protecting male privilege. What if you're a woman and say it's wrong? Right? Abortion's wrong if you're a woman. Remember, there's no universals besides the social binary, oppressor and oppressed. There's no individuals. So if you're a woman that steps out of the group identity, what they are saying is right and wrong, then you're wrong as an individual. If a woman says abortion is wrong, she has internalized oppression. She is blind, a part of the evil system, and hasn't woken up yet. She's blind and shouldn't be listened to. Right? No individuals. That's a big difference between postmodernism and applied postmodernism. Right? There's no individual voices. Your truth is not your truth anymore if it doesn't align with the group's truth. You with me? So, major shift that has happened, and this is one of the reasons, again, for this class, because I feel like Christians are left behind. We're still fighting postmodernism in a lot of ways. But there's a shift that's happened within our culture. Any questions yet? We're on question 9. But any questions up to this point? I'm starting to wake up, so I'm good now. Whew, it's got me going. The adrenaline's coming. It's great. Okay. 9th question. How do we know what is true? How do you know what is true? Okay, biblical worldview, divine revelation, right? Truth revealed to us. That's what revelation means. Divine revelation. First, special revelation, God's written word. That's 2 Timothy 3:13. Second, general revelation, the law that's written on our heart. Right? Be made in the image of God, the law is written on our heart. Human conscience, Romans 2:15. And God's revelation in creation, Romans 1:20. To this we apply our God-given capacity for reason, logic, discussion, and debate, and to assemble and weigh evidence in pursuit of the truth. Biblical worldview. Right? Applied postmodernism. This is, again, the question, what do we know is true? The notion of objective truth, reason, logic, evidence, and argument are discredited tools that are oppressors employ to maintain their hegemony. We gain knowledge of truth through victims who, based on their lived experience of oppression, have greater insight than oppressors. This is referred to as standpoint epistemology. Okay? So those that are victims have an authority to speak into truth. Those that are oppressors are blinded, okay? And again, asleep. Need to be woken up to what the victims are saying, and they need to shut up and listen. Okay? Reason, math, and logic are out. They're social constructions to keep the oppressor in power and those not in power oppressed. I think this is like the biggest frustration that when I talk to people, it's like I just want to look at the facts, and this other worldview, facts don't matter. Right? Reason's out. It's not a reliable tool to get to truth. Therefore, you can say 2 + 2 can't equal 5. That statement is a racist statement. And Harvard has come out to say that. You're just continuing the racist system, right? Western logic, Eurocentral logic, they'll say. In standpoint epistemology, knowledge comes from experience, from the experience of being oppressed. I used this analogy last time we were together, and I think it's just a good analogy. I stole it from someone else, so it's not something I came up with. But if white, heteronormative man, it's kind of like you see in black and white. If you're a woman, right, a white heteronormative woman, you have kind of you're oppressed by being a woman, but you're an oppressor by being white and heteronormative. You can see shades of red. So when you see something, it's like a movie that's all in black and white besides red. And every time there's red in the screen, you can see that. If you're a black woman, meaning you're heteronormative, but you're black and you're a woman, you have two different oppressions, being black and woman. You can see them red and green. If you're black, gay, and a woman, you can see red, green, and blue. Right? You have special access to the truth over white males that are heteronormative. Therefore, white males need to shut up and listen because they have no access to the truth, and they have nothing to offer because they have no authoritative truth. They have no access to it. And this is where identity politics comes in. Right? Ideas and character don't matter anymore. Only the person's victimhood status, because they have special access to the truth by their lived experience. So it doesn't matter what a politician's ideas are for the future. What matters is he a she? Is she black? Is she gay? Well, then she has special access to truth, and that's who we should vote for. Right? This is completely contrary to the civil rights movement, by the way. Again, let me just read Keene. I have a dream that my four little children, will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the conduct of their character. That's just out. It's all we judge people by now. You just listen to the news. It's like the first thing that someone will say. It's the first black, or it's the first Latino, or it's the first Indian. It's like, well, what about who they are? In fact, I talked about the vice president of the Southern Baptist Convention, who's a black man, conservative, completely against all this social justice nonsense. And I just watched this interview of him, and there was an article written on him that said, like, first black vice president or something like that. Maybe it had been the college he was at, and he was just so upset. He goes, what does black have anything to do with it? Why not my education? Why not what I have to say? Why not the hard work I've put into this? Why is the first thing that says there is black? Any questions so far? 3 more questions to go through. Okay, 10th question. Who has ultimate authority? Again, we kind of answer this, but biblical worldview, God and his revealed word in Scripture has the final authority. Applied postmodernism, again, what I just said, victims are the final authority. The claims of a victim based on the subjective lived experience must be believed without question. If someone says that they experience racism or sexism, and you question it, in our culture nowadays. If you say, well, can you show me the facts of that? Nope, the judgment has already come. Right? 11th question. Is there a future final judgment? This is an important question. Biblical worldview. Yes. Right? Jesus will return and accomplish perfect justice. He will preserve all that is good and rid the world of all that is evil. Until then, he extends mercy, forgiveness to sinful people. You know, this is one of the reasons we can forgive people, right? We can forgive people, or not even this idea of transactional forgiveness, where I go up to someone and ask for forgiveness, and they grant me, and they say, yeah, I forgive you. Someone comes and asks for forgiveness to you, and you grant them forgiveness. That's transactional forgiveness. You can say, I forgive you. But this is also the non-transactional forgiveness. Someone completely sinned against you and never asked for forgiveness. You can overlook their sins, that's what Scripture says, or forgive them, non-transactional. One of the reasons we can do that is because we know that sin is going to be paid for one day, either by that person himself or on the back of Jesus on the cross. But God will make sure every single sin is paid for. So we don't have to. We can let it go because we have faith that no evil will escape, right, a holy God. It's one of the reasons we're forgiven. And by the way, it's one of the reasons God can't just forgive. Because he's an authority and he has to make sure every sin is paid for. Therefore, it's either paid through that person in eternity in hell, or his son pays for it on the cross. But every single sin will be paid for because he's a judge in authority, right, God? Just like it would be like a judge in a courtroom going up to a murderer and saying, well, I just forgive you because I'm a forgiving judge. That would be unjust, right? In fact, there would be an outcry, people saying that person should be kicked off as a judge because he's not upholding justice. Well, it's the same with God, right? He's an authority. He has to punish sin. But because of that, and he's a perfect judge, we can forgive. You with me on that? Super important. Applied postmodernism. There is no final judgment. There is no God who will return to punish the wicked and reward the upright. Rather, injustice must be rooted out here and now by those with the power to do so. Right? And there's no forgiveness. Right? It has to be dealt with now. Right? In fact, past sins like slavery need to be dealt with now. And that's why you see this push to bring justice, right, in the now, here and now, where Christians say, I can let things go. 12th and final question, and then I'll open it up to questions that you may have. How does it all end? How does it all end? Biblical worldview, paradise, new heavens and new earth, right? If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, then you'll be paying for the penalty of your sin in hell for eternity. Applied postmodernism. This is important. Utopia. Once, and this goes back to the question I said before, once the oppressive structures are torn down, then man's goodness will be able to flourish. This is why ideas have consequences. Okay? This is why that whole Chad experiment in Washington, right? If we just get rid of all the evil systems, man's goodness can flourish. But we know as a biblical worldview that's not true. This is why I believe Marxism ultimately failed. I think Marx truly believed this and his followers, that if we can get rid of the capitalistic system that causes greed, man's goodness will be able to just come out. Well, that didn't happen, right? The biblical worldview was proven true that man is depraved. And the guards that capitalism and a Christian worldview puts up to stop man from being as evil as he could be, stops man from being as evil as he could be. You get rid of those, like defund the police, and you're going to see what happens. Right? One of God's common grace is using the government and systems to slow and to hold back our evil tendencies. You get rid of those systems, and then man will flourish in his evil, in his depravity. Now, don't get me wrong. As Christians, we believe, because man is depraved, that there are systemic evils in the world. And we should call them out when we see them. And that's the thing I want to make sure we don't do, is get jaded to the fact that there could be systemic evils in the world. In fact, America was systemically racist at points in its history. Slavery within itself. Abortion is systemically evil. And when we see systemic evil or injustice, we should call it out as Christians. But there has to be facts and proofs and reason behind what we say. We can't just call out the whole system and say it's evil, and we should destroy it, thinking that man's goodness will just prevail out of it, right? That's the thought behind it. It's the ideology behind it. That's why riots on the streets, that's why I defund the police, because it's the idea that if we can get rid of the system, man's good nature would be able to prevail at that point. Our culture has watched too many Disney movies. Right? That's my 12 questions. Again, we're not ending very hopeful. I'm hoping next week we will end a little bit more hopeful as we look at the pros, like what does the Christian worldview say to a lot of these different things. But is there any questions before we end tonight?
It seems like when God says, "Heaven out, they will not see."
Oh, yeah.
Ears they will not hear. It seems like it all comes back to that.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah. So he was saying that passage in Isaiah that's repeated over and over and over again in the New Testament. Having eyes, they do not see; having ears, they do not hear. Like, it's just what we're seeing right now. The more you suppress the truth, the more insanity. It's Romans 1. Right? The more we suppress the truth, the more we suppress the truth, the more debased minds. The more we suppress the truth, the more debased minds. Like, it's a downward spiral if you read Romans 1, and for sure what we're seeing. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, there's 12 points where they disagree. Biblical worldview and applied postmodernism. Or is there any points that they agree? No. I don't say that lightly. There's a lot of Christians that are saying, yes, they do, and that's how these ideologies sneak in. The problem is they define, like, I want to even say, hey, both agree that racism is evil, but I can't even say that because they define racism totally differently. And so, no, I can't think of it. I've thought of that. And the problem is that there's so many churches and so many Christians that so badly don't want to be called racist, right, by society, that they let these things sneak in because they're afraid to be called that. You know what? Call me racist by your definition. I don't care. I care if I'm racist by a biblical definition. Right? That is what I want to stay away from. I don't want to be racist according to what Scripture says is racism. But if you change the definition and you want to call me racist, I'm at a point where I don't care what you call me because I'm going to stand on the truth. And if that means you're going to call me a racist, okay. And we have to get to that point. Any other questions? And by the way, I say that because I love other races. That's why, again, I stand against this so strongly because I hate to see the tribalism that this is causing. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people have been asking me that, and it's a hard question. The question is, how do we respond to fight back? The answer is the gospel. I mean, that sounds simplistic, but it truly is the gospel. I mean, that's always been the answer in culture. I think next week we'll see truths that line up with some of these things. And I think it's important that we stand on those truths very strongly. But people's hearts aren't going to change until, again, it's that idea that they're blind. People are blind. Our culture is blind. And for the first time in my life, it's becoming super obvious, right? That there's a difference between those that aren't blind and those that are blind. We've grown up in a Christian nation, Christian-ish nation, that we've had Christian values. So those that aren't saved and those that are saved kind of look the same. That's slowly changing. Right, where they're starting to look very different. That's very exciting in one sense because now we know who our mission field is. It's very clear, right? To go and proclaim the gospel to people that don't really want to hear the gospel. The changing of hearts is the solution. That was one of the questions. What is the solution to the problem? It's the changing of hearts, and that only happens through the gospel. So ultimately, the answer is the gospel. Proclaiming it to our kids, proclaiming it to our neighbors, proclaiming it to our family members. And the gospel is what's changed whole cultures and society. So I don't say that as like, last-ditch effort, why don't you go share the gospel out there? The reason America is because of the gospel. The reason Western civilization is because missionaries went to evil pagan people, our ancestors, and shared the gospel with them. And so the gospel is the solution. But we'll look at some truths that we also need to stand on. And we need to stand on them knowing that people are going to call us racist, homophobic, all types of names, chauvinists. This morning, like I said, bring the men forward. You're a chauvinist. You're anti-feminist. We've been called that as a church just because we bring men forward and pray for them and say, hey, you guys need to lead the church. We just got to be okay being called that. Right? We also can't get jaded to racism and those things. That's the other side of it. Did you have a question, Andy?
Yeah, I was just, this class is clarifying a lot. It's being used by terminology.
Yeah.
All over radio, all over media. This morning you mentioned 70% of the kids, our kids, that want to universities and colleges are coming out having lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are they going into these prepared to know what they're going to encounter?
Yeah.
Most of the streets that we're seeing these riots at are full of these college kids.
No, yeah, totally.
These are younger kids.
Yeah. But just to prove that, Portland and Washington aren't historically states that have large African American populations. Like, it's a bunch of white college-age students that are rioting, right? But yeah, sorry.
What I was thinking, Nathan, is just the clarity that you're bringing forth to us here, these parents and grandparents, and I see some kids here that are probably going to these places, is the preparation to know when they get there. Hey, I recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught that, a year ago.
Yep.
And be able to critically think your way through it, repel it,
yeah.
Get through it. I know there's kids that can get through this.
Yeah. I don't know how to restate that question, but let me say this, and I'll just answer it because it's not even a question, it's a statement. And it's a true statement, and I think it's an important one that I continue that statement. I think the kids that go to college don't get re-indoctrinated in college. I think they're already gone before they get there, and then they get the further indoctrination. They're not prepared to go to college, like you're saying. They don't have a biblical worldview to stand on, an apologetic to stand against it. I don't know how to change anything outside of what we do as a church, what we do as a school here at Country Oaks, Heritage Oaks. But we have, I'm trying to think if anyone's in here. We've done apologetics in our school. In that apologetics class, we've talked about all this social justice ideology. In chapel, we've had experts come in. Zach's speaking. I mean, people from video in to speak on these topics. We talk about it boldly here at HOS, just so you know. We have taken kids, prepared them, taken groups to University of Berkeley to meet with professors as we sit with them. Luke, did you go on that? And Luke, Krista, did you go? No, Luke did. We've taken them there to hear from the professors themselves that are atheistic and want to indoctrinate our kids and have them an hour with them, with our kids, while we sit and listen, and we don't, none of us say anything. Let the kids kind of debate and talk with them, and then debrief with them, and to prepare them for these things. We send them on the campus of the University of Berkeley, and Luke can testify. Shocking how little those students know at the University of Berkeley as you ask them these questions like, where does morality come from? Never been asked that before. How have you never been asked that before? And so, yes, we need to prepare our kids. We also shouldn't send them, in my opinion, to the University of Berkeley and different places like that. But that's my sermon this morning. I want to be very clear. Parents have the responsibility to make decisions for their kids, not the church. So I don't want to put anything that I personally believe on you as a parent and what you should do or not do, because that's overstepping my bound as a pastor. You are responsible, and you'll be held accountable as parents to God, not necessarily me being held accountable for what I'm just proclaiming truth, what the Bible said, like I tried to do this morning, without giving too much application on what you should do as parents. You need to take that truth and figure out, how can I do this now? I've been called to do this. What should I do, and how should I do that? Because you'll be held accountable to God for that. But we want to come alongside and help. And that's why we have sent kids to Berkeley and prepared them and kind of debriefed with them so that they can hear it from the horse's mouth, I guess, and then come along. Every kid that went, and you can ask Luke. Is Luke the only one here? Where's the Biswingers? No, they're helping out. They're amazing. Christy went. Did Timmy go? Timmy didn't go. Christy went, and she's here. You can ask her too. Every single person that came back from those trips that we've went on, just their faith was built a ton, because they're like, they don't have answers, and we do as Christians. Like every single person said that. Every single high schooler that went there said that as they come back. And so, yeah, we need to do that. We need to prepare our kids for battle, for war. Right? The Bible, take every thought captive. That word captive is war language. Again, I've said this a number of times. You don't need armor to go party somewhere, go on a play date, right? You need armor to go to battle, to war, and we're called to put on the armor of God. We need to train our kids and disciple our kids to go to war. So, you got me on a rant. I'm sorry. I agree. That's all I should have said is I agree. Again, coffee's kicking in. Any other questions? We're kind of running out of time here. Yes. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great question. I'm going to answer it totally different than the way you're asking it. It's a great question because we see these reactions. We swing one pendulum. That's in everything as humans. So you're asking, do you see a reaction within the social justice? Let's move that aside and let's talk about us. Here's my fear about this class, is that we swing the pendulum so far that when we do see racism or when we do see systemic evil of some sort, we don't call it out because we're sick and tired of just everything being called racism. Right? Racism does exist because we have depraved hearts. And whenever we see it, we better call it out as Christians and speak into it. And those that are truly oppressed, for whatever reason, we need to be there and love on those people and be compassionate to those people. And the people that have grown up in harder situations than we've grown up, there is an idea of privilege. I grew up a very privileged life. It's not because I'm white. It's because I had parents that loved me and really took care of me. And not everyone had that same privilege growing up. And we need to be there for people and love people and have compassion. And my fear is that we get so jaded as a church to everything that's going on. So one of my fears about this class, to be honest, that's why I think it's a great segue into saying this, is that we don't have compassion still. So that's a hard balance, because I can feel in my own heart getting jaded towards these things, just because I'm sick of tired of everything being racism and everything being, about sex and everything being about being a woman or male. So does that make sense what I'm saying there? Yeah. So we need to make sure we're not reactionary, and I think that's important to keep in mind. All right. With that said, let me pray. I want to make sure we honor our child care. Next week and the week after that, if you have questions, I think about them through this week, and I'll try to answer some more questions next week as we go through. Again, we got through part 4, so we will start part 5, which we're going to go through that statement, social justice in the gospel statement, together, and we'll have a positive and a negative. And I'm glad we need some positive. So, yeah. So let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, God, Lord, as I just say that jokingly, Lord, the positive is that you're in control. Lord, through this all, you're sovereign, and we need to find rest in that. We should sleep well at night, Lord, even with chaos all around us, Lord, knowing that you're sovereign, you're in control, you're good, and you love us, Lord. So I pray that that's our heart, that through everything that's going on, Lord, that we don't get depressed, that we don't get jaded, that we don't get anxious, that we find our rest in you, Lord, that we understand these ideologies, that we stand up for truth, Lord, no matter what names may be thrown at us for standing on the truth, Lord, and that we trust in you, Lord. So I pray that for this group. I pray that for our church, Lord. I pray that for the church at large in America, God, that they would be bold with the truth. So be with us, God. I thank you for this class, and I thank you for everyone that's here. In your son's name, amen.